We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. I need to set the record straight, Shane. I had lots of Eagles fans complaining to me on Twitter this past week. So for those of you that follow me on Twitter, you will know that I am turning 30 this year. And my plan was to get back out to the States for a game. And I'll be honest, it wasn't actually my full intention to go see an Eagles game. As depressing as that is, I have been to Philly once. I have been to an Eagles game. I was going with a few friends and we were thinking maybe we'll make it into like a broader, like 5-6 day trip. Long story short, the home games we wanted to go and see were a disaster. So no one was playing at home. We could only go 1 week because of work. So literally, we were looking at Green Bay. We were looking at Chicago. In particular, there was both away. So we ended up going to basically the only hometown that I like to look of was Cincy, and they happened to be playing the Eagles. So it turns out I am going to see the Eagles this year, which is exciting. Tickets are booked. For everyone complaining to me, why aren't I going to an Eagles home game? I've literally got 1 weekend off. The Eagles are away. There's nothing I can do. And then for many replies, why are you going to Ohio? We're pretty lucky. So we've managed to book Ohio State tickets on the Saturday. And we're even booking Pittsburgh. We have booked Pittsburgh tickets on Monday night because they happen to be in Pittsburgh on Monday. So I'm literally going back to back to back. Ohio Saturday, Cincy Sunday, Pittsburgh Monday, which is a hell of a trip. Lots of driving, but it's going to be really, really good. But to respond to everyone, why am I not going to Philly? That is why, because we are away and I have 1 weekend off. If we were at home, it may have been a different story, but that is literally the only weekend that I could possibly go. So yeah, I wasn't planning on seeing the Eagles this year, but I am actually seeing the Eagles. So anyone who listens, who's going to Cincy, who knows they will be already, get in touch. All my friends will definitely be cheering on the Bengals because that's what friends do. So I'll be the one Eagles fan probably amongst my group. But if anyone's going, please get in touch. But to answer when I say many questions, about 3 people that have replied moaning at me for not going to Philly. That is why, Shane. So yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, that sounds like an awesome trip. And so, yeah, you guys definitely, if you're going to be at the Cincinnati game, reach out to Jonny. He might need some support because apparently his friends are not going to be supportive. But
yeah, my best friend is a Cowboys fan because one of my best mates just does the opposite of everything I do. So I got him into NFL and he responded by supporting the Cowboys. Although good news, the Cowboys play that Sunday night. So the second we come out of Cincy, we'll go to a bar. We'll watch Cowboys probably get blown up by the 49ers on Sunday Night Football. So if the Eagles can beat Cincinnati and the Cowboys can get blown out by the 49ers, that would be a hell of a Sunday for me, being with him, who's a big Cowboys fan. So we can only hope. And I forgot to mention as well, thank you for the one Twitter follow. I can't remember his name, but massive shout out to the guy who responded to my tweet when I said, look what I'm doing for my 30th, who replied, you're only 30, with the old question mark, exclamation mark, which is a way of saying, what? And then he assumed I was at least 35. So whatever the opposite of an ego boost is, really appreciate that. And he done it in such a loving way as well. There was no abuse. There was no sarcasm. It was just, oh, you're really not that old. I was like, oh, thank you.
It's a big reality check.
I'm going to blame the lighting in this room. It's not made for podcasting, Shane. That's what it is. It's a spare room. It's always the lighting. Everyone knows lighting's a secret to a good camera.
Yeah, we'll work on that lighting for you there for sure. So, yeah, you guys are joining in today, and originally Jonny and I planned to do a film review for some of the Eagles' top draft picks, but there was breaking news over the last day or two, and so this is now the emergency Devontae Parker retirement podcast, right, Jonny?
Yeah, I've got all the takes. Been watching him for about 12 hours in the bunker, was ready to go, and then all of a sudden he retired. Up there with Eagles legends such as Frank Gore. Who else have we got who's signed and never played? There must be a few others out there. People in the comments, I'm sure, will let me know.
Frank Gore never even signed, so he's at least more legendary than Frank Gore, who never signed.
Yeah, fair play. He must have turned up to whatever camp they're running currently and not looked very good, and then gave it the old, I want to be closer to my family, which we all like to say, don't we? That's when everyone knows that we just haven't got it anymore. Not close to your family when you're 25 and you're in your prime, but all of a sudden, it's all about the family.
Miles Jack too. Miles Jack decided to become a plumber after he showed up in Philly. So
yeah, that was impressive, wasn't it? That was a great one. Yeah, I genuinely had a few people tweet me about a month ago saying, "Can I do a Devontae Parker breakdown?" And it was on my list, and I'm so glad I didn't bother watching it. So glad. Sometimes being lazy can be good.
So, in all truthfulness, we are going to dive into the film on some Eagles draft prospects. We're not going to get through them all today, but we're going to shoot to get through the top 3 picks. But before we dive in there, I just want to read the first part of a review that we got on Apple Podcasts. 5-star review says, not since the Kist and Solak show has an Eagles pod come close to this level of deep analysis. It's also clear that these guys truly root for the Eagles to do well and not make dumb personnel moves. As a Pacific-based Eagles fan, this is great content to wake up to, from Nick Foley and Bonaparte. He also asked a question that we're going to hold on to, because next week we're going to record a mailbag episode of the podcast. So you guys can submit mailbag questions to us through Patreon. All the Patreon questions will definitely get answered. We'll also take questions from reviews. We'll also put up a post on Twitter. Questions do not have to be Eagles related or even NFL related. And I think a lot of times it's more fun if they're just random questions, but we're going to do that. We may also have a guest on next week. We're going to work out some details, and then we'll get through the rest of the Eagles draft picks. But we're going to dive in here. We'll start with Quinyon Mitchell. We'll move to Cooper DeJean, and then if we have time, we'll get to Jalyx Hunt. And we've already got a great comment here from Austin asking if the Jalyx Hunt tape was recorded from his mom's iPhone 5. And I don't know, Jonny, you've looked at it. I don't know if our listeners have looked at a lot of Jalyx Hunt film, but 1, it's hard to come by, and 2, it is often quite grainy. So we'll make the best of it. Also, if you followed us throughout the season last year, you know that we try to talk on these podcasts in a way that people just listening on audio platforms can follow along. But we will show film clips and things. And so if you want to watch those out, this does go onto YouTube, onto Twitter. You can go and find it there and watch the video version as well. Still go download it from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. But if you want to actually see the clips and you're not watching live, these are archived on my YouTube channel. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in here. And we'll start off with Quinyon Mitchell. And so we'll sort of break this down into some of their physical attributes, stats, and then we'll get into some strengths and weaknesses from the film. So here is Quinyon Mitchell's spider chart. He is 6 foot tall, which is 66th percentile among cornerbacks, 195 pounds, which is 61st percentile. He ran a 4.33 40-yard dash, which is 95th percentile, with a 38-inch vertical leap that is 74th percentile. He has 34th percentile arm length, 95th percentile hand size, and overall he had a 9.79 relative athletic score, which basically means he is 97.9th percentile among all cornerbacks tested when you coalesce the athleticism scores with the height weight. So very athletic cornerback. A few stats I'll throw your way here, and then we'll get into the film. Over the last 2 seasons, Quinyon Mitchell led college football in forced incompletions with 44. In 2023, he was PFF's highest graded cornerback in man coverage and their 4th highest graded cornerback in zone coverage. And he does not get flagged. He only had 1 defensive pass interference, 2 total penalties called on him in the last 2 seasons combined. Over the course of his career, he played 1,790 snaps at boundary cornerback, and he played 100 snaps in the slot. In 2023, he was targeted 59 times, and he allowed 26 receptions, which is a 44% completion rate, for 282 yards and 0 touchdowns, with 1 interception and 12 passes defensed. He also had only a 6.7% missed tackle rate in 2023. That is dramatically down from a 14.3% missed tackle rate in 2022. And all those charting stats come from PFF, just to credit the sources there if you've seen different charting metrics from different places. So that's sort of the stats and physical profile of Quinyon Mitchell. Jonny's written great articles about all three of these guys that are on Bleeding Green Nation, and you can go read his full articles there. We're going to sort of use those as a template, and we'll show some film here. But Jonny, why don't you take me through a couple of the biggest strengths you saw when you watched Quinyon Mitchell on film?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is we've always said this podcast is a slight extension of my writing as well, because obviously I can't make up stuff different to the podcast than I write. So maybe if you want like the full thing, we don't need to go through every single strength. What we'll do is we'll highlight a few key ones. You mentioned actually a few of the key ones, which are the numbers in terms of pass breakups and lack of pass interference as well. That's huge. And the way I do this as well, just a little peek behind the curtain, is I watch as many as I can pre-draft, but I'm not watching a huge amount pre-draft because I can only get to 2-3 games. But post-draft, I can just go nuts because I've only got 10 players to watch. So I do change opinions. Sometimes I watch players back and really change my opinion on them. Sometimes it's just very similar. Quinyon Mitchell's film is like awesome. And I'm not saying that because the Eagles drafted him, because I'm very happy to be critical of players when I don't see it. Like the film is just really, really good. I don't think we need to show anything about the speed, about the height, weight, speed, like length. We know all that stuff. Like that's all very, very obvious. I want to talk about and the off coverage first of all, because I think this is something that links to Vic Fangio's scheme in particular. So if you have a look, Shane, the article where it says excels in off coverage, there are a couple of clips. One that I posted myself actually, which is pretty freaky, where he like runs past the ball at the break point, and it's one of those things that when you see it, you don't see it very often. It's one of those plays where he is in off coverage and he is essentially, it's just the curl route in front of him. But the speed in which he reads it is one thing, but the speed to actually come downhill and play it is absurd. This is something, as Shane's got the clip up now, you just don't see this very often. Like it almost looks weird because I think some of it's because the ball's thrown behind him. But to say you hear the phrase very sort of classic, he runs the route better than the receiver. He literally does. He outruns this. And I think what Vic Fangio asks his cornerbacks to do a lot is play that vertical plane, which I think he's very, very comfortable. He's very comfortable running deep. Deep posts, the kind of things you have to cover a lot in quarters, because if they play tricks opposite him, he may end up one-on-one with the receiver. And one of the hardest covers for a cornerback playing outside cornerback in a Vic Fangio defense is covering deep posts. So when I was watching him, I was really looking carefully for this. There's another clip you're just showing now of that click and close, which is like really, really good. Like the speed in which he drives on the ball, that 5-yard burst, it's why testing matters. Anyone that argues that testing doesn't matter is nonsense, because of course it matters. And you want to see corners that run extremely quickly, especially in the 5-10 yards. Then my other clip, Shane, that I loved, and sorry, you can show that one first if you want. Go for it.
No, go ahead.
Was the Senior Bowl. I really like Senior Bowl footage because you get so many good camera angles that you don't see elsewhere. So I only tweeted one clip, or in the article I've got one clip with him playing Roman Wilson. And I believe they had a very physical, competitive game. And I love clips like this. There's something about watching. It's almost like you're there. These kind of clips from like the iPhone in the crowd. And the fluidity to his, like, if for those watching on screen, it's a stop and go route, and he just runs with Roman Wilson. And Roman Wilson's a very good route runner, and he just runs with him. It's so effortless. Everything is easy. There's a phrase I like, or a scouting term, like hands and feet in sync. And it's hard to describe what it is, but you know it when you see it. And the way I define it is just everything looks fluid. Some players, I mean, just human beings, look out of sync when they run. Things are not coordinated. His hands, his feet, his arm, they're all lined up. This is such a lovely play. And as I said, I like the fact it's almost like you're there. So I've got a few Senior Bowl clips actually with Jalyx Hunt as well. So there's lots of things we could talk about, but they're the big things for me. I think carrying post routes, carrying vertical routes, click and close speed from off coverage. And then I think just the natural fluidity of how athletic he is as an individual. He feels like, I mean, I always think when I think of scouting is like, how does he bust? We'll maybe come on to weaknesses, but in terms of like him as a prospect, like it's really good. He's better than a top 20 player. He would have gone earlier if it wasn't for some of the things we'll talk about with the weaknesses, in particular, level of competition, because you can't avoid that. If you had a corner at Alabama who has the tape and the traits that he has, he goes drafted top 10, top 15, because when I think of cornerbacks who bust, and I think of like your D. Milners of the world, or who did the Browns take, who the Eagles sign, Greedy Williams, they're often freak athletes who can't play the ball. They're freak athletes who move really well, but don't win at the catch point. Quinyon Mitchell was like the opposite. He's a freak athlete who is as good as it gets at the catch point. When you see like 44 pass breaks up over 2 years, that's nonsense, really. That's all borderline ridiculous. So to do that, as well as being the height, weight, speed prospect he ticks both boxes. He ticks the production and he ticks the athletic box. So yeah, I'm incredibly optimistic about this. I think cornerback's one of the hardest positions to transition to, and I think Fangio in particular, because you've got to know when to keep in man coverage, what we might call Meg or something, when you're going to line up one-on-one, or when you are going to let the receiver go if he runs like a crossing route. It's not an easy defense to learn for an outside corner, but I expect him to start, and I expect him to look pretty good early on. He will get beat by good receivers because it's the NFL, and there's some extremely good receivers in there, and he does have some things to clean up on. But I think his film is, for a corner prospect, like as solid as it gets, really. I've not seen a lot of better film in the past few years, personally.
Yeah, his film is really clean. And you talked about his click and close. And I believe we showed this clip previously on a podcast, but it's Toledo against Illinois. And this is the one that gets the slow motion view from the back to see him breaking on a slant route. And so if you look to the bottom of the screen here, it's hard to see on the first one because the scoreboard's in the way. But on the replay, you can see this is Quinyon Mitchell in the bottom right corner of the screen. And if you watch slow motion, the way the click and close, he perfectly arrives as the ball's getting there to get the pass breakup. I mean, just watch his footwork in this. His head's over his toes, weights up on his toes. Now it's not playing for some reason, which is just great when you try to do things with film live on a podcast. So
it's also great in slow motion. Motion.
Yeah, it's like, there we go. He's weights over his toes. He drives down and he meets the ball at the catch point. And it's such a good play. And it's not just, I mean, again, anybody can like put together a highlight reel of a few plays to prove a point, but that stuff's all over his tape. He's really good, to click and close. And it's something that, he played a lot of off coverage, and we're going to talk about that when we get into some of the limitations, potentially some of the weaknesses, but he played a lot of off coverage. He's so good at just patiently waiting on the route to break. Sometimes maybe he waits too long and he trusts his makeup speed a bit too much to make up, because when you play off coverage, you're typically putting your heels at 7-10 yards, whatever your landmark is going to be, and you're reading out the receiver so you can be up on your toes and break down if it's a route breaking. And if it's not, then you open your hips and turn and run. And sometimes he waits a bit long to try to open his hips and turn and run. And he could get away with that at Toledo because he just has such elite speed. I do think that he'll have to be willing to turn and run a little quicker at the next level because that aggressiveness will get him burned by some of the faster receivers that he'll play against. But he's so good at reading those routes out in front, knowing when to break, knowing when to make contact at the catch point. I think that's one of his more impressive traits. And I think it's why Toledo played him off so much. He was just so good with that click and close.
Yeah, you mentioned route recognition there as well. That's something that you noticed in a lot of the slow-mo clips, the one you posted earlier. Like, he sort of has an innate sense of what's going to happen. I think he really understands the position, which is so important for cornerback. I mean, when corners get older, they can survive without the speed because they read things so well. Yeah, you mentioned flipping the hips. I'm sure many listeners have an idea of what we mean by that, but essentially if you're running a vertical route against him, sort of the later you can turn and run, the better. Because what receivers are trying to do is they're trying to close that gap as quickly as possible. If they're running a comeback route, they want you to turn and run so they can then come back to the football. He is willing to leave it to a last minute before turning and before flipping his hips, which is what I think you're on about. But this is where testing matters. When you run a 4.33, he's got deep speed. If he does, he doesn't need to turn and run too early because he knows he can trust his speed. And it could be that you're right, the occasional receiver gets the better of him where he gets overly aggressive. But I think for the most part, that's not a huge concern. I know this clip as well, because I'm pretty sure this might be from my article as well. This is the one where he pushes him out of bounds just ever so slightly. And I love sort of the understanding of where he is on the field as well. We talk about like this idea of like, understanding where you're playing. He understands they're in the red zone here. He knows he's got a lot of ground to cover, and he just sort of effortlessly pushes him out. And then once again, the ability to play the football, Shane, that's what gets me really excited. I get fed up of corners who run really well and can't play the ball in the air. He is the exact opposite of that. Like the way he goes up and gets this is textbook. So it's awesome. I don't really have any other strengths, Shane, to be honest, that I was desperate to throw out there. So do you want to talk through this play? Because I feel like you're itching to get us something in particular.
Yeah, I was just going to give an example here of what we're talking about with playing off coverage and flipping the hips. And so Quinyon Mitchell's 8 to 10 yards off of the line of scrimmage here. And you'll notice at the snap, he's not flat footed, but he's not retreating. You're just sort of there slowly shuffling back. And once this receiver clears, if this is a slant route, we're breaking here, right? If it's an out route, we're breaking about the 20-yard line. And so he's watching those. And once the receiver clears these landmarks, once he passes the 20, now we flip the hips and we're going to turn and run downfield. And that's what we're talking about, flipping the hips. And he's really fluid doing that. And I would argue sometimes he's waits a little long to flip those hips, and it's trusting in that speed. But it also just stems from that aggressiveness, wanting to break downhill and make a play. So if you weren't sure what we're talking about when we talk flipping your hips, that's what we're talking about.
So Shane, go back to the start of this play one more time. I knew this would happen. We go way too in depth, but this is actually the best example. And I didn't realize, pause it now. When I spoke about earlier on about, there's lots of different coverage, mod or meg. I don't really care about the technicalities of what you want to call it, but essentially what quite often happens in quarter or whatever defense you want to call it, Vic Fangio, quarters, whatever, split safety. This is a really good example. You can see they've got the plane of 4. So it looks like there are 4 defensive backs almost in a line. But what teams will often do now is essentially they want to be 5 over, in this case, I think, I'm trying to add up. My maths is bad.
I think it's
5 over 3, 6 over 3 or whatever. And basically the safety that would normally help out that quarterback on an island doesn't anymore. He will take the free receiver if he comes across. Fangio calls it tricks. It's a very fancy way of essentially what it basically does is it means that when you're the outside cornerback, you are literally one-on-one. If you look at this play for Quinyon Mitchell, talk about being a one-on-one coverage, Shane. There is no one 20 yards away from him. This receiver can go anywhere. He can go, as you said, slant, post, in, come back. This is the receiver's dream. This is where you want an AJ Brown, an X receiver. This is like what you live for. You basically want to have no one else around you. This is like backyard football, one-on-one. Defensive coordinators don't call this play unless they trust their outside cornerback, because this is a pure matchup play. So this is awesome. Just as you were playing it, I was thinking it's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier on. And Austin commented in the chat about the hands jabbing at the ball and breaking up. Yeah, that's what we mean when we talk about the 44 pass breakups. Like, it's really natural. The fact that you can get 44 pass breakups and then 1 pass interference penalty in 2 years feels impossible. Like, it almost feels too good to be true, because you either think you're going to be overly aggressive and then constantly jump and get called for pass interference, or you're not going to get many breakups. He is the opposite. So he had 0 penalties in 2023. I think you may have said this earlier on. If you did, apologies. And 1 pass interference in 2022. So you've got the most pass breakups in however you want to categorize it, 44 pass breakups the past 2 years, and 1 pass interference penalty the last 2 years. Like, you don't have to be brain of Britain here. It's an English phrase, sorry. You don't have to be too intelligent, shall we say, to realize that 44 pass breakups and 1 pass interference in 2 years is pretty absurd. It's pretty freaky. Right, should we get very, very quickly, before this is a 5-hour podcast on Quinyon Mitchell by himself? Did you want to talk very quickly about the weaknesses? And I'll give you my main one, I think, for next year, what we'll see.
Yeah, real quick, let's answer this question. Austin asks if Quinyon can play in the slot. Not that that's the plan. Just curious. I'll give my take first. Not experienced in the slot, only had 100 snaps in the slot. I don't see a reason that he couldn't, because what you want from a slot defender is you want quickness, right? And you want a guy that's willing to stick his nose in the fan and run defense. And I think Quinyon Mitchell has the fluidity to defend to. Well, I say that it really depends on what you want out of your slot, because sometimes you want a bigger guy in the slot to be able to body tight ends. And so you need some flexibility, but I think he's got the fluidity. He's not the best tackler of running backs, but he's willing. And that's not uncommon at the next level for corner. You want a corner that's willing, even if they're not that great a tackler yet, you can develop that. So I think he could play in the slot. I'd be very surprised if you see him there next year, though, because I think he's going to be really good outside.
Yeah, he's not a slot cornerback. Could he do it? Yes. Traits-wise, yes. Fangio defense style, waste. Massively wasted. Run defense is too important these days for nickel corners. Right, seeing as I mentioned it, I'll jump in, Shane. Just very, very quickly, weaknesses, because to be honest, there's not a great deal. The obvious one is school and players he played against. You can't get away from the fact he's not playing against top athletes. Benny mentioned about the change of direction. I think, no, I wouldn't say I'm that worried about it, to be honest. I guess the query is the way he played sort of 5-7 yards off. We didn't really see him pressing up a line of scrimmage. We didn't see him like turn and run with slants that often, but I didn't see it, if I'm honest. The issues I had were two of them. Number one, hands in press, because he just didn't get the opportunity to do it a lot. So how he gave so much cushion. It may be that he's not asked to press very much at the Eagles anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm also going to call nonsense on PFF's run defense stat. I don't care if they say 6% missed tackle rate. I didn't like the tackling technique. Fair enough. It may be it may have worked last year in college from coming from a smaller school, but the way he tackles will lead to missed tackles in NFL. Like, I watched the first 2 games I watched, he just didn't wrap up at all. He dives a lot with his shoulder, sort of dives at ankles a lot, and every so often he gets lucky and wins. But I was shocked when I saw that PFF tackle percentage and missed tackle, because I thought it would be much higher. And then when I realized what it was the year before, yeah, I don't believe he improved his missed tackle rate that much. This is a clip from my article that I showed. Basically, if you want to know what he tackles, just watch this. There is 0 attempt to wrap up. That is and that was not the only one I saw, which is another reason why I don't want him in the slot. As Benny mentioned, he's better vertically than he is laterally, and I agree with that, which is what we're talking about, him being a classic outside corner, carrying posts, carrying vertical routes. The good thing about playing a Fangio's defense is I don't really care if they can run with like drag routes and stuff, because they barely have to. If a team is running mesh, you just let him go, you shout under, and the slot corner will pick him up. So you're basically playing on a vertical plane a lot. So how many times do you see Darius Slay line up and like run with slants and run with it just doesn't really happen in this style of defense that often. So I worry a lot less about that. That was my big one, was tackling, because I think tackling is a massive part of playing a defensive back these days. One thing that teams do a lot against the Eagles with Darius Slay and Bradbury is they'll line up 3 receivers on one side, and then the tight end to the lone side, what we call like a nub set. And then they'll run at that tight end side. And the reason why is because the Eagles are playing a lot of zone, which means they won't move their corners around, which essentially means your outside cornerback on that side has to play in the run fit. And a lot of teams did that against the Eagles, and I expect them to continue to do that, because either one of Slay or Quinyon Mitchell will be a target for opposition teams in the running game. But that's the only real weaknesses I've got. And to be honest, tackling technique is not top of my priority list when I'm looking at first round corners.
Yeah, Austin said, "How dare you question PFF, Jonny?" And
I do apologize.
That comment made me chuckle, and I almost started to ask you if you like The Office, but then I realized if you do, you wouldn't like the same version of The Office that I've watched. But for the Americans out here, it reminds me of the clip in The Office where Kelly is like, "First of all, how dare you?" But anyways, I got a chuckle out of that. You mentioned his press rate. He actually had the second lowest press rate in the last 5 years. He only played 20 snaps in press coverage in 2023. And what's interesting is the corner opposite him, Toledo's other outside corner, played a lot of press. So it's not like it's just something Toledo doesn't do. I have a theory, and I mean, we'll never know. I mean, maybe we'll know if he's really good in press coverage right out the gate. Not that the Eagles are going to do that a lot, but I just have a theory that playing in the MAC, if he was pressing guys, he would have been so dominant. You just never throw his way. And when you have a guy that's a first round NFL draft pick in the MAC, you probably want to incentivize teams throwing his way. So I do wonder if that was like a coaching point that like, hey, we're going to play you off because we want teams to test you. Maybe it was a him preference. Maybe he's not as comfortable in press. I don't know. We'll have to see it play out, but it's the classic. He wasn't asked to do it. I don't think that necessarily means that he'll be bad at it. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll show a clip here, that this is a bad rep from the Senior Bowl against Roman Wilson. And so we'll just run it here. And you see he's stumbling all over himself, and Roman Wilson's wide open, and it's a bad throw, right? But one thing I think it shows here, and it's something that I saw at times from him, is kind of in his back pedal, he tends to get his weight over his heels at times. And so if you kind of watch this is a place you never want to be as a cornerback. you want your weight over your toes so you can react. And you can see he's leaned over backwards, his weight's over his heels, and he stumbles out of this break. Now, this isn't something he does all the time. Like sometimes there's just a bad rep, and we showed the one earlier that's perfect, right? And if we kind of freeze frame as he's leaning backwards here, and I switch back to this other one against Roman Wilson, look where his weight's at in these two. Look where his weight is, head over toes right here versus head back over your heels here. And so there's a little bit of inconsistencies in that, but that's something I noticed from time to time when he struggles, especially to like flip his hips and run. A lot of times I thought it was because he got his weight back on his heels instead of going from weight on the toes to opening those hips to run. So that's just a little technical thing, a little technique thing that I picked up on. And again, we're nitpicking, but you kind of do have to nitpick if you're not just going to dismiss him for playing in the MAC or say he can't play press, because really his technique's really good mostly.
Yeah, and also the whole point of this podcast is to be in depth. It's like the whole point of the show. So if you don't want half an hour on Quinyon Mitchell, apologies. I would say that firstly, you are 100% spot on. I saw that rep as well. I love the senior bowl reps, man. I absolutely love them. You can see so much technique stuff. I think the problem with press coverage numbers as well is people have a funny definition of press. So when you just say press, they think Madden, and you stand there with two hands and shove the receiver. Like you can play mirror match press where you don't actually make any contact with the receiver. I don't know if he's that good at that technique. So I think that's a flaw where he just wasn't asked to play a lot of mirror match. And basically what I mean by that is you're almost up as if you're going to press, but you don't actually stick hands on the receiver, but you still stay very close to him. I think he's so much better 5-10 yards off. I think that technique issue is because he doesn't do it very often. And at the senior bowl, what do coaches want you to do things that we don't see very often on film, because that's the whole point. There's no point seeing Quinyon Mitchell playing 10 yards deep because we know he can do it. The film doesn't lie. So what do I want to see? Do you know what? Line up against a receiver that can go both ways. And I want to see your mirror match technique. And I think that's something that he will have to learn early on. I think the best news for him, though, is that he's going to walk into a system that will ask him to line up in off quite a lot. But I think it's fair to point out, if you want him to be a top corner, you have to be able to do different things. Some receivers, they're very poor at beating press coverage. You may want to press them. Some receivers that struggle with mirror and match technique, you may want to get close to the line of scrimmage. Certain receivers, perfect, stand 10 yards deep. So you have to, the best corners could obviously change their technique week on, week out based on who they're playing against. And I think that is something that he will have to learn if he wants to be a very, very good corner, is being able to play different techniques, because the numbers suggest he's basically an off coverage corner only at this point. But I'm not too worried because of the Eagles' defensive scheme, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And had a comment here from Benny saying it's a good call out on the technique. Hopefully he can get coached up on that. And, I fully expect that to happen. So much of coaching, especially if you're going to get rookies on the field, you have to find what they do well and play into that strength while identifying those weaknesses and coaching that up. And that's where I think he's such a good fit with the Fangio scheme. The Fangio scheme's not going to press a lot. And so it's going to play to his strengths early, but that doesn't mean you don't identify and work on those weaknesses. And there's nothing that on tape, at least, that indicates to me that he's incapable of playing press coverage and learning it. I mean, he's a fluid athlete, good hands, all that. So I fully believe that's something that he can do. Austin also says he wants 2.5 hours on Quinyon Mitchell. I'm not currently equipped to do a 2.5 hour show on Quinyon Mitchell because I'm all out of clips that I wanted to show. But Jonny, do you have any other things you want to shout out with Mitchell before we move on to the next selection?
No, as much as I love it, for the sake of the show, let's progress to another extremely fun player to watch.
All right, let's go to Cooper DeJean, a guy that Jonny and I both identified as a potential day one target. The Eagles obviously get him on day two, which seems like a steal. He is 6 foot tall, 6'1.5 inches, which is 68th percentile, 203 pounds, which is 86th percentile. He ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, has 48th percentile arm length, and overall ended with a 9.85 relative athletic score. A few stats on Cooper DeJean. In 2022, so 2 years ago, he was the only cornerback that PFF assigned an 85 or better coverage grade and an 85 or better run defense grade to. And so, when we start to talk about his strengths, we talk about corners that can come up and tackle and that are willing to come up and hit running backs. And Cooper DeJean loves to get involved in run fits. And so that's a big deal. He's also a good return man. He was the 7th highest graded punt return man in 2023 with 11.5 yards per return. And he did have a touchdown. And so you talk about the new return rules, and he could play a role in that. He was targeted 46 times in 2023, and he allowed only 20 receptions for 194 yards, which is a 43.5% completion percentage. He had 0 touchdowns allowed, 2 interceptions, and 4 pass breakups. He also only committed 3 penalties. He had a 12.2% missed tackle rate, again, all per PFF. And in his career, he had 1,123 snaps at boundary corner and 163 snaps in the slot. He had a few snaps like in the box and at safety as well. So Jonny, as you turn on the Cooper DeJean film, and again, Johnny's got a great article, go check it out. But what are some of the strengths that really stick out to you with Cooper DeJean?
Yeah, he's I don't even know how to do this one, Shane, because I've got so much that I could talk about. I think sometimes we like get obsessed over position and where can this guy play and where can that guy play? And anyone that's ever played sport, like, can he tackle? Can he run? Can he cover? Yes, yes, and yes. So I don't really care where you stick him. Like, I think he could play outside corner. I'm actually coming around to the idea he could play nickel this year more and more because of how important run defense is in nickel. I'm starting to basically, the more I read about defensive coaches these days, they just seem to talk about the nickel being the most important position on the defense, arguably. And I'm starting to come around to the idea that maybe just stick him at nickel this year and see what happens. But I don't even know where to start. Like, I think he's more than fluid enough to be an outside cornerback. There's loads of good reps. All the people that say he's really stiff, I watched a lot of him. Yes, you have reps where he's a little bit stiff, when his technique's a little bit off. But you also have some really good clips where he's not stiff at all. So I think he's fluid enough to play nickel. I do think he's better vertically, so he would fit as an outside cornerback. I think the number one thing that I absolutely love is just physicality, competitiveness, ball skills, tackling skills, like any of those in any order. Like, he will press receivers, he will come up in run defense. His tackling technique is brilliant. I think he's so smart, like route recognition, whether he's playing man, whether he's playing zone, he understands depth. He does a really good job of like not getting too deep when in zone coverage and giving himself enough room to sort of jump forwards. And he's had a few pick sixes that way as well. Like, I don't really know where you want to start here, Shane. Honestly, I'm flicking through my notes and I'm like, you go everywhere. Everything I've mentioned, like you mentioned kick returning, like, God, we're not talking about that because we could go in, like, he can do everything. 20 pass breakups the past 2 years, 7 interceptions, as you mentioned, like gunner on special teams, like basically just very good football player. No idea how we fell to 40. I don't really want to get into that too much because we've done it on draft weekend, but I don't understand that in the slightest. I think teams genuinely just got way like over analytical on, can he play outside cornerback? Is he a safety? Rather than just being like, is he really good at football? Yes. So let's actually choose a couple of clips. If you've got any that you want to start with, Shane, because I'm having a meltdown looking through like the 18 that I want to show.
Yeah,
so
this one
go through a few.
Yeah, this clip I think just shows a lot of things I love about DeJean. So he's at the bottom of the screen here. He's lined up across from a guy that's going to run just a drag route that the safety on DeJean's side steps down to. So I don't know if this is like a cover 3. I was watching DeJean, not the whole defense, but what I love is DeJean realizes this is the only route on his side. It breaks shallow. And so he immediately works back to this crossing route. And so first of all, I think he just does such a good job here. That route's not a threat. And he identifies this route going vertically. He like glances at it. And then he's got eyes on the quarterback as he's getting upfield. And he just allows the quarterback's eyes to lead him to the ball. Look at that catch. I mean, I know this is grainy footage. It's Iowa Rutgers, but over the shoulder catch. And then, he's going to run this back for a touchdown. And it just encapsulates so many things that I love about DeJean. Fantastic route recognition, reading the eyes of the quarterback, understanding that he doesn't need to chase this drag route. He could never make a play on the drag route anyways, and working deep to a threat coming across to his side of the field. Great ball skills to go make the play. Fantastic playmaking ability with the ball in his hands. I mean, this is essentially, we talk about, this isn't a punt return or a kick return, but it's about the closest thing you get to it playing defense, right? You're catching the ball 25, 30 yards downfield, setting up your blockers and returning this for a touchdown. I just think there's so, like, if I had to pick one play that encapsulates like so many things that I really like about DeJean. This is the play. And so I think that was the perfect place to start for me, at least talking about DeJean and what he brings to the table.
Can I give you a similar one, if you don't mind bringing it up, on the article where I talk about the ability to pass off routes and read the QB? There's a fake screen of a post wheel, and I absolutely love this play because, once again, he's not just an athlete. Like, the Eagles aren't drafting like big, fast players who can hit hard but can't actually understand anything. Like, he knows what he's doing out there. Like, he absolutely can play outside corner. Like, this actually isn't the clip I was on about, Shane. We'll do this one first, though.
Okay,
we'll do this one first because it's very similar. So this is not the one I was on about, but this is the one where he's cover free. So as he's like running deep with a vertical receiver, he's keeping an eye on the quarterback because he knows he's in zone. And this is also what being a good athlete means, because you haven't got to worry too much about flipping your hips too early. So he's reading the QB and he breaks. And yes, it's a bad throw. But that is, I mean, I'd say that's very solid outside cornerback play. Again, the return is good. The one that I really like, Shane, though, is on the article, the one below it. This was my favorite play of DeJean's by a mile. So for anyone who ever played Madden and will understand, like, I'm sure everyone's run post wheel before. It's a classic one. So post wheel, your outside receiver runs a post. The idea being that against cover 3 or even cover 4, possibly. In this case, I believe it's cover 3, although it's not all 22. The idea is the deep post will force the outside cornerback to run with him. Therefore, you have the outside receiver taking away the attention of the deep safety and the outside cornerback, and then you throw the wheel in behind him. They run it with a fake screen here, and they run it perfectly. And this should be a touchdown because they get the defender to jump. And all of a sudden, from your screen, Cooper DeJean just appears. This is like going back to when I used to watch the Eagles versus Seattle's cover 3 that killed everyone. I'm pretty sure this is some knowledge if I'm right. I'm pretty sure Chip Kelly ran a post wheel to Zach Ertz, who caught a touchdown in the corner of the left end zone, probably about 6-7 years ago, maybe even longer. And you kill cover 3 that way. And DeJean just, he's managing to run, and you can't see it because it's not all 22, but he's running with the post. He recognizes that the post is running into the safety. So he recognizes that he doesn't need to stay as tight to it. He's probably seen this team on film before and realized that there's a threat behind him. And he's probably not looking directly at the quarterback because he's running with a post, which is impossible. But that's just natural instincts. And then not just the ability to actually think about it, but the ability to have the athleticism to turn, run back, and intercept the ball. And as I said, it's a shame we haven't got the all-22 for that play because I'd love to see what he looks like. But I think zone, man, like play recognition is, we haven't even shown, we don't even need to because of timing, but clips of him tackling, like the wrap-up technique he uses. Like he's got almost everything. And I think the reason why he fell must have been because people overthinking where he plays and some of his weaknesses. But I think, and it's hard to sound like really basic, just saying he's a good footballer, but that's basically what I mean. He's just really good. He understands how to play football. Like, he understands how to run. He understands how to cover. He understands how to hit. He understands how to wrap up, and he understands what the offense is trying to do to him. Like, that's all I need. We can work on the rest. Nickel, safety, outside corner, I really don't care. And I said this pre-draft as well. I will take the tools and the traits and the athleticism and intelligence, and I will turn him into whatever the hell you want. I really couldn't care less at this point what he's going to be. Stick him anywhere, and I think he'll turn into a good player. Like, pretty much that simple.
Yeah, I'm going to show another clip here. This is a reason I think he could be an ideal slot defender. Because he's really physical in coverage, especially against like bigger bodied guys. So this is Cooper DeJean in the slot. He's lined up over a tight end for Iowa State, a guy named Benjamin Brahmer. He's 6'7", 240 pounds. So this is a big boy playing tight end. And I mean, we could argue if they should throw a flag on this play, but just watch the physicality that he plays with. Just knocks him off the route, is able to deflect the pass. Now, I mean, is that getting flagged at the next level? Probably. But I really like that we've got a guy that is an outside cornerback, a safety, a slot, whatever you want to be. And he's going against a guy that's 6'7", 240, and it doesn't phase him at all, and he out-physicals him. And so he's physical when he needs to be. It's one of the reasons, along with his run defense, that I think he could be a good guy in the slot. He's also at his best, I felt like, coming downhill, which people talk about him playing safety, and I can see that too, because playing things in front of him where he's able to keep vision on the quarterback. And So, we talked about before, I think he could play any position, wherever you want him. You want him at outside corner? I think he's got the tools to do it. I can understand why you would want to play him in the slot. I can understand why you would want to put him at safety. I think, the possibilities are endless with DeJean, and they can really try him at different places and see where he fits. But as we talked about on our post-draft show, the Fangio defense is complicated, and he is a rookie. And so I do think you're going to try him everywhere, but I think you want to try to limit the versatility you're asking him to give, at least his rookie season. So if it's me, I would be hoping ideally that he can step in and be your slot defender to get on the field as a rookie.
Yeah, one of my off-season projects when I've got some time over summer is to go and watch some of the Fangio defenses last year and figure out why they sucked in general. And this is a very, very minor hypothesis that I am working on, Shane. I have a feeling Fangio's defenses suck when the run defense sucks because safeties can't play downhill. I think safeties coming downhill is absolutely critical for a Fangio defense. Like, I know everyone always says it is, but I think it really might be like the be all and end all. Like, I think if you're giving up 5-6 yards a pop because your safeties can't come downhill quick enough, you're dead. I think like you really are in huge trouble. And I can't prove this yet because I haven't watched a lot of film. But when you look at the teams that do it quite well, I think that they have very good safeties in run defense. And I think that this might be where DeJean ends up. I do want to show one play, Shane, before we spend 20 years on DeJean as well. In the article, towards the bottom of the strengths, where I talk about him, and I say, if your outside cornerback can do this in run defense, that's a massive win. And it's a tweet from someone at Dusty Everly, where they showed DeJean coming downhill. Like, this play is ridiculous. If you point him out, like, when I talk about plays that like Darius Slay, James Bradbury, probably Quinyon Mitchell don't take, this is him taking on a blocker. I can't, was it the receiver or the halfback who hits him?
Halfback.
Yeah, halfback hits him. He doesn't turn around. He takes the hit, manages to keep his eye on the ball carrier, spin, and make the tackle. Like, that's defense one-on-one. That is exactly what, if your outside cornerback can do that, it's like a cheat code. It's a cheat code. When you're drawing plays up on the board and you're saying, right, we'll get our H back on their outside corner, you're going, well, that's a win for 90% of teams in the league. It's great how scheme sometimes doesn't matter if talent, oh, you know what I say, Shane, talent always beats scheme. On the whiteboard, that is a win for the offense every time. When your outside cornerback can take on the H back, fight through it, and then still make the tackle as well, like, you're winning. Your run defense has just got significantly better. I have literally changed my mind, Shane, about 500,000 times about where I want to play him. I don't know. I'm almost tempted to try him everywhere and see where it fits. I still think outside corner is like the most important position. But then I think actually nickel might be amazing. And then I think, do you know what? Safeties need to come downhill, and he would be unbelievably good coming downhill. So I'm sort of at a loss. I almost don't want to talk about it because I don't know what I want to do with him. So I'm just like, let it figure out. But I keep saying it, good football player. Like, I'll sound like the most generic analyst in the world. The man can play football, and I don't care where he plays it, as long as it's on defense, he will be really good.
Yeah. I'll show a couple more clips here just to talk about a couple of weaknesses that you can see on film. So if you've read or listened to other people talk about DeJean, you've heard him talk about like the tightness in his hips. And I want to show you an example or two of what that looks like. And I also want to show you an example of where I think he's got poor technique and press coverage at times. So,
Shane, can I just say one thing as you're talking this through? I think sometimes people get a little bit obsessed, though. I keep hearing comments like, oh, he's got tight hips, so he can't be an outside corner. And I'm like, you do realize that tight hips are going to be a problem when he plays in the slot as well, right? You do realize if he plays safety, the whole point of being versatile is that he can come downhill and cover the slot. And actually, there's an argument, which I'm surprised more people haven't spoken about, that if someone's got tight hips, you want them outside in press coverage. Like, you want them running up and down, covering post routes. So I find it really weird, this idea that he's not a corner because he's got tight hips. And people keep repeating online, and I'm like, have I missed something? Like, just because you've got tight hips doesn't mean you naturally have to be kicked inside. You arguably want your inside players to be even more fluid. And I think you could make an argument that nickel will be even more challenging for him because of his hips at times. But I wanted to mention that before you show it.
Yeah, you're spot on there. because, and I mentioned it with Quinyon Mitchell, that fluidity in his hips is where I could see him being good in the slot. And I don't think that's where the Eagles are going to play him, but being able to match those two-way goes on the interior is really important. And so that is a negative if it comes to projecting DeJean into the slot. The big positive for that is we just talked about how good he can be in run defense. So this is DeJean at the bottom of the screen, and it's a little hard to see because it sort of goes off the screen, but just watch when the receiver breaks off this route, how many steps. I mean, it's kind of off screen, but you can see where DeJean right about here starts trying to break down and get back upfield, and watch how many steps it takes him. So I probably should have found a better clip because it's off screen, but you can see it takes him about 5 yards to throttle down and get back upfield. And that's not ideally what you want to see from a corner. So when people talk about the hips, now I can't rewind for some reason. It's that little bit of change of direction. And we can show another one here. Now, granted, this one is against Marvin Harrison Jr. And so let's pump the brakes a little bit, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably the best receiver I've ever watched. But Marvin Harrison Jr. runs a whip route here. And Marvin Harrison Jr. at his height and weight should not be able to run this route and snap it off as much as he does. But watch the way that Marvin Harrison Jr. is able to come out of this break versus the way that Cooper DeJean comes out of the break. Foot in the ground and he's gone. And DeJean ends up with a hand on the ground. He's kind of stumbling out of that break. And so when people talk about the fluidity of the hips, if you've heard that, you don't know what people are talking about. This is what we're talking. It all comes down to that change of direction and things. And you know, we mentioned he had an elite relative athletic score, but fundamentally no agility testing. And I think if Cooper DeJean and his agent thought that he would go run a good short shuttle and go run a good 3-cone to put some of that to bed, he would have done it, and he didn't. And so I think it tells you he's aware that that's a bit of an issue as well. And then the last thing I'll point out here, this is just a rep of press coverage, sort of like we were talking about with Quinyon Mitchell, sort of a mirror technique. He's up on the line right here. He's not really getting hands on him. But what you want to do is you just want to funnel this guy to the sideline. Like, he's lined up right on the numbers here. You want to push him to the sideline. And I think Cooper DeJean, a lot of times in press coverage, he opens up too wide and he just gets into a foot race straight up field with receivers. And so we can see here, he's just opened up. And look, I mean, we're totally opened up here. We haven't pushed the guy to the sideline, and we just let him run straight up the numbers. And this is going to be an incomplete pass. And DeJean's right there in his hip pocket. But when you're going to be in press coverage like that, if you're not getting hands on a guy, you do want to be pushing him out to the sideline. And that's just not something DeJean, I would say, is the best at. And so when you talk about with the hip issues that we talked about, which issues, we'll put air quotes, maybe you want him in pressing. I think there's some technique things, and there's some great reps of press coverage too. We showed the one against the tight end. There's some reps where he's really violently pressing guys, but it's up and down. There's a little bit of lack of consistency there at times. And so that's something worth watching with Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to be honest here. We obviously like the guys, but we're going to point out. I think that's literally why I have that Marvin Harrison rep I had in my article as well. And that's the entire reason why I have worries about the slot. That whip route, I mean, we see that all the time in the slot. That's the Julian Edelman special, right? The Wes Welker special. When you can go both ways, that's what's really hard. And on that rep against Marvin Harrison, he's lined up in slightly inside, and that gives him the ability to go both ways. When anyone was younger, anyone who's ever run, or anyone done like a test where you have to turn and run, you know, like the kids that aren't great athletes, they sink to the ground. They almost like push off their hand. They get so low. That's sort of what DeJean does there. Like, he needs to stay upright. And by the time you sink, like just basic physics, if you're getting lower to the ground, that takes time. And then you have to get back up. And by the time you've done that, the elite athletes in the NFL are gone. And Marvin Harrison shouldn't be able to do that at his size. But I think the biggest problem with that rep was the fact that Marvin Harrison could go both ways. I think that's the big issue I have with playing him in the slot. Again, I say big issue. Like, they're quarterbacks that can survive without perfect hip flexibility. Final thing I mentioned is the one that you showed. I had in my notes as well. I basically said, I think he sometimes is too dependent on his speed. And I think he is willing to let receivers get over the top of him because he thinks that he can basically catch up. I think he will sometimes be a little bit over aggressive. Whereas I think someone like Quinyon Mitchell is a bit more safety first-ish. I think when you're aggressive, you can give up big plays. And I think if DeJean does start, I think there will be times when he struggles to turn and run, not because he can't do it, but because he sort of like tries to wait to the last second to really put the jets on and really turn and run. I think sometimes if he loses at the line of scrimmage, he doesn't seem that fussed because he's got recovery speed. I think recovery speed in college is very different to recovery speed in the NFL. And if you lose at the line of scrimmage in the NFL, you're probably done, especially if you're playing as an outside corner.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to a couple of comments here. John says the Iowa coach said they were going to throw him in the offense this year if he came back. If you watch Iowa play football, they should probably just try anything on offense, if we're being honest. So Eagles Eric says that Cooper DeJean's better suited as a box safety or an outside corner. So he's more on that train versus the nickel. And again, yeah, I think there's pros and cons for really any position you want to put him at. And I'm really interested to see how the Eagles use him if he's able to carve out a role this year. Benny says, are you young?
Shane, just quickly, the argument for putting him in a nickel, because I agree with Eagles, Eric, and we've basically agreed with him on this podcast, I think. The argument for the slot is just simply the Fangio scheme and how important run defense is from the slot. It's a massive part, like a massive, massive part. And if your run defense isn't very good, and let's be honest, the Cooper DeJean might be better tackling than the Eagles linebackers on the roster currently, that you might need all the help you can get. And run defense is not just about one or two players, it's about an overall team. And if you want to get the best players on the field to help in run defense, maybe you stick DeJean in the slot because you know he's going to add a huge element. It's why last year, even though he cannot play the slot, I quite enjoyed watching Sidney Brown in the slot. I mean, the man can't cover, and it would have been a bit of a disaster if he stayed there all year, and he's nowhere near as efficient as Cooper DeJean is in coverage. But Sidney Brown in the slot was awesome in run defense, like really, really good. So there is an argument that you sacrifice some coverage. I don't want to say risk, but you sacrifice some coverage sort of upside for just getting more players in general that can play against the run. Because as a roster as a whole, I would say the Eagles don't have a great deal of players that can play against the run anyway, and run defense have been a problem the last few years. So maybe that's the argument as to why I think he might play there this year. But I agree that his actual skill set in coverage is not suited there.
Yeah. All right. Well, as usual, Jonny, we came into the day expecting to do 3 players, and we've been on here for an hour and we've only done 2. So what do you think? Should we go ahead and dive into Jalyx Hunt? Do we save Hunt for next week? How are you feeling an hour into the podcast?
The problem I've got is that Hunt's the one that I really want to talk about. So I don't want to rush it, but I also want to talk about him now. What is it? 57. This is great podcasting, isn't it? This is what before the episode I said 40 minutes, 10 minutes on each. 57 minutes in, and we've done 2. Let's go for it, Shane. Why not? I want to talk about Jalyx Hunt. It's in my brain now. I prepared to do it. So we're an in-depth podcast. There's already a few comments saying do it. Yeah, let's go through Jalyx Hunt because I spent way too long trying to desperately find film for him. So let's go for it. Do you want to start things off?
All right, let's do it. So Jalyx Hunt, he is 6'3" and 6/8 of an inch, which is 47th percentile for an edge rusher, 252 pounds, which is 21st percentile. Now, although he is a little smaller, he does have 80th percentile arm length, which does show up on tape. We'll talk about it. He ran a 4.64 40-yard dash, which is 82nd percentile, and he was a good jumper, 88th percentile vertical leap, 95th percentile broad jump, which is just generally a way that you measure explosiveness. And he has a really unique career path, like we talked about. He was a 210-pound safety at Cornell, and now he's a 252-pound edge rusher in the NFL. And so you don't see safety to edge rusher very often. You might see safety to linebacker to safety, but it's a pretty big swing of positions here. So as for a few stats, he dropped into coverage on 7.6% of his snaps over the last 2 years. And he had a 90.4 and an 85.2 PFF coverage grade in those 2 years. Targeted 16 times, gave up 11 receptions for 92 yards, 0 touchdowns with an interception and a pass breakup. He also had 37 pressures on 229 pass rush attempts last year, which is a 16.2% pressure rate. And he had 8 sacks, which is a 3.5% sack rate. He also had a 5.3% missed tackle rate. Again, all those stats per PFF. So, Jonny, let's get into the all 22 video taken from his mom's iPhone, because that's about the quality of footage we're able to find on Jalyx Hunt. But you've got a whole article up on Jalyx Hunt. Walk me through some of the biggest things that stuck out to you.
This was the hardest research I've ever done for a 3rd round pick ever. It was painful. I'm out there desperately tweeting and like emailing guys like, "Can I have access to your Google Drive, please?" But I can't actually tweet the clips because Twitter will ban you if you tweet all 22. I managed to watch quite a lot. A little bit of combination of Senior Bowl and the good news is, Shane, I spent hours watching Hunt and I have absolutely no idea what I think. So that's always helpful when you come out. I don't know. 3rd round is way too rich for me. We'll talk about why, but like basically in a nut and bolt, why did the Eagles take him? Because he's a legitimately freakish athlete. He moves as fluidly as anyone I've seen play edge. Like, to be honest, there are times that he moves too fluidly and I'm watching him like, this guy's not on edge. Like this he can play safety. He looks like he could play.
He did play safety.
Like I know he did, but I mean, he looks like he could play it now still. Like there are snaps that he moves and he drops into coverage and you're like, he looks like he could play man coverage on a tight end. Like he could do this stuff. So essentially, how would I summarize him? Like ridiculously good athlete. I think he's been drafted. No, I'll get into that later. I think he's been drafted more for scheme specific roles. In terms of his actual play, he's inconsistent in terms of his burst. So I've seen people say he has great snap timing. I don't think his burst is a huge strength. I think it's mixed. And I think there's a technique reason why his timing is mixed. There are snaps when he absolutely flies out of his stance and you think this guy can get it. And then there are snaps when he doesn't. Similarly, he has snaps where he bends the edge and he has good flexibility. He can sink and dip under tackles and you think, this is it. Like the pass rushing tools are there. The problem is, everything I'm going to say, I could go through the other strengths as well. We can cross the face of offensive linemen. He's good in pursuit, good arm length, can stun offensive linemen when he hits them. Just every single thing I've said right now, Shane, literally every one, just put the word inconsistent next to it because nothing is consistently done well. It's one good snap and then it's one bad snap. Then it's, yes, he can sink, he can dip past the offensive tackle. Then it's, he's running straight past the quarterback. Like, where is his flexibility gone? There's a snap when he jumps off the line of scrimmage and you think, that's it. That's why he's drafted. Look at the burst. And then you watch the next 2 snaps and you go, what's happened? He looks like he's not moving. It's like there's no speed to power. He doesn't generate any force on certain reps. Let's start with a few strengths. Do you have any clips from the article that you pulled, or do you want to talk through a few of them? I've got loads that I could show. My favorite one is probably the first one I tweeted on the thread, which is where I said, little Jalyx Hunt film thread. If you want to know the positive, if you want to see why the Eagles drafted him, just basically watch this play on repeat. It's the first one on my film thread where I think I even said in it, Shane, that it excited me the most. Because when you're evaluating pass rushers, just show me traits. Like, you want to see every trait on show, just watch this play. You want to see the athleticism, the burst. I mean, watch how he jumps out of his stance for a start. Then you want to see the hand length. I mean, just, they use the term offensive lineman get their hands on his chest. When I say the offensive lineman doesn't get his hands on his chest, I think he puts them on his chest for about 0.01 seconds and he just rips it away. Everything's in sync. As he's ripping it away, look here, bit technical, but look at his chest position. So if you pause it now, Shane, look at where his chest is angled when we talk about bend and like flexibility, once he gets past, almost like half a second later, Shane, almost like half a second later, if I want to be that specific. Now, his chest is pointing directly towards the quarterback. So he can get in a straight line. But there are other reps where, I kid you not, his chest is pointing towards the umpire or on-field referee, whatever you call him in America. What do you call him in America? Ref? Umpire?
Well, I think most people call them referees, but like there's actually specific like names for the different officials.
Oh, screw that. We're not
and
doing
one
that.
of them is called an umpire and one of them is called a referee. And so it gets really confusing.
Right.
But generally speaking, we just refer to them as refs.
Right. So basically, going back to it before I went on a tangent, that is what you see. Like, that rep is everything. You want to see everything on show. You want to see burst. You want to see flexibility. You want to see the ability to bend and dip. You want to see the ability to get his sort of torso, his hips facing the quarterback. And you can see he really does bend the edge. That rep has it all. I'd go as far to say, if I was drafting players, which is a good thing I'm not, because I'd be persuaded by one play like that. I get it. I watched that play and I was like, oh, I see it. I see it immediately. When you have people going out there like Greg Cosell saying that he's got elite pass rushing traits, when you have people like Daniel Jeremiah having him in his top 100, when you have Harry Roseman save it like they loved him, that's the play. Watch that play and you see everything that's good. Is there any other clips you've got before I keep going on and on and on that you wanted to talk about based on what I've said?
Yeah, I've got some clips to show some of the inconsistency when we get to the weaknesses. But
should we do some good first then? Do you want to do a couple more goods?
I wrote good burst off the line of scrimmage, and then I modified it to just say he's explosive because, like you said, that burst isn't consistent. But I think you see, like you mentioned in this clip, his long arms help make up for that lack of height. He's not tall, but he does do a generally good job with his hands, getting his arms extended. He doesn't, trying to think of how to say this. He doesn't just not have a clue how to rush the passer. Like, he didn't just run around guys. He shows the beginning of pass rush plans and moves. Now, they're not well executed. Again, he's played edge rusher for like 2 years. But he does show the beginnings of like building that technique out, which I think is a good thing, especially when you're talking about, I mean, he's not going to be able to just run around everybody at the next level. And so it's good that he wasn't solely living on that at Houston Christian. He's trying to develop some of those moves. There's a lot of work that's needed there, a lot of technical refinement, but I think you see the beginnings of that.
There's no counter move. If offensive linemen get hands on chest, game over. Game over. There's nothing there. He wins early or he doesn't win at all. There's a few clips that I did want to show on the positive still. And then there's a few comments saying about like how he's raw. Like, he is unbelievably raw and he's 23 years old. Like, don't get me wrong. This may never work, this pick. He's not Davion Taylor because I've seen him rush the quarterback. That rep I just showed you on screen, Davion Taylor never had a single rep like that in his entire life. I won't go on a rant again against Taylor because I felt mean last time. But I'm telling you now, go and watch his college film. That play that we just looked at isn't there. There's another one where I think the level of competition is horrendous. About 2 plays after it on my article, Shane, where I said I have no clue what the tackle is doing. And by the way, level of competition is absolutely a concern because I don't understand what the tackle is doing here. But like, again, exactly the same. Like, the ability to get low, the ability to sink, the ability to get his hips facing the quarterback again, and now that burst. You know, it's good when like the screen almost like jutters or like lags because the burst now he goes and he hits really hard as well. He hits really hard. You can see it. Like, if you want to sell the positives to me, and we haven't even showed clips of his movement skills. We should probably show one before we move on to the weaknesses. Just show the one that I've got of him in coverage. It's not the best clip in the world, but I've literally put it in there saying I probably could have got a better clip. But when I say he doesn't move like an edge defender, like he genuinely looks like he could play safety tomorrow. Like, I think naturally coverage is his strong suit. And I think there is absolutely, this is the reason why he is drafted. I mean, he's lined up like a slot cornerback up there, Shane. Like, what are we doing? I mean, that's not, when I say he can play in coverage, I know the ball goes nowhere near him. I don't care. I'm scouting like traits, like the way you can just see him aware, the way he moves around. Like, if you watch like people like Hassan Reddick in coverage at times last year, they looked like they didn't know what they were doing. And that's a rubbish clip. And I realized when
don't remind me about having to watch Hassan Reddick.
And I had so many better clips that I watched. I mean, I tweeted that one out and I regretted it instantly because you can barely see him. But I'm just looking at like the physical movement skills. Like, he legitimately can play in coverage. If you want to have edge defenders that have awareness, he is already the Eagles' best in coverage. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I think he could step into the team from day one tomorrow and would be the best edge defender in coverage. Now, to be fair, it's because he played safety, so you would expect him to be. So he's a weird guy. Before we get into the weaknesses, because I do want to show a few clips that are slightly concerning, and I don't want to speak too positively about him because, in my opinion, he's not good enough to be a third-round pick, and I think it was a reach. And I think when you bet on traits and tools, I think you are taking a massive risk. Is there any other strengths that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, good movement skills as a dropper in coverage is also one of my bullet points here. And one of the things that Fangio really likes to do is blitz a linebacker from depth and drop out the opposing edge rusher. And so you're still rushing 4, but you're trying to manipulate those protections. And Hunt has the ability to do that. And we came on this podcast last year and we complained about the Eagles trying to do that. And one part of that issue was the Eagles linebackers were horrendous as pass rushers. I mean, I synced up like the Cowboys linebackers and the Eagles linebackers blitzing just to show the difference from one of the Dallas games that we had. But the Eagles linebackers were horrendous as blitzers. Well, they went out and they drafted Jeremiah Trotter Jr., good blitzer. They signed Devin White at his best blitzing, right? And so that part of it, we can check those boxes. The other part of the box is just having someone that's semi-competent as an edge that can drop out into coverage. And Jalyx Hunt can do that. And Hassan Reddick couldn't do that. Josh Sweat can't do that. And so, not that I want to see that a ton. And I don't think you're going to see Hunt playing on the defense at all this year, unless there's like major injury things. You'll see him on special teams probably. But I think that's the vision. That's the goal, is being able to get him good enough rushing the passer, competent in run defense, and his strength will be when you're able to drop him out into coverage. But I think there is a ways to go with that for some reasons we'll shout out here in just a minute.
The key thing you said there, Shane, is good enough. I literally wrote, this is a pure scheme fit pick. Like, this is Vic Fangio arrogance. Like, I'm better than you. Like, I don't need great pass rushers because I'll figure it out with scheme. Like, we'll break down your protections. We will get one-on-ones with Jalen Carter. We'll manufacture one-on-ones for Huff. And that's what this pick is about. It's almost about other players rather than him. However, I don't care how good you are as a scheme fit. I don't care how good you are in coverage. Eventually, when you're playing edge, you've got to be at least able to rush the quarterback a little bit. I think I literally put, this is from a direct quote from my article, I said, versatility and the ability to drop into coverage is great, but realistically, if you can't rush the passer as an edge, then you will struggle to get on the field. Like, basically, he needs to just be good enough. The idea he's going to be like a 12, 15 sack guy, like, fair enough, he's got pass rush traits. If he develops unbelievably well, then in an alternative universe he could. But I think he's extremely raw. He needs to just do enough to win the occasional one-on-one and at least make the offensive think he can win. Because if he does that, the movement skills and the coverage skills, as I said, it's there. And the pass rushing traits are there. It's just so inconsistent. Should we talk about some of these inconsistencies?
Yeah, let's dive into it here. So I've got a clip queued up here that I'll show. And I mentioned the burst, and it's not, he's explosive. He doesn't always have good bursts off the line of scrimmage. And he's got a false step off the line of scrimmage that really costs him a lot of his explosiveness. So I've got two clips here. This one is egregious, but it's also ends up being a run play. And so I wanted to show a pass rep too. So that's the second one. But Jalyx Hunt here at the bottom of the screen, just watch his feet at the snap of the ball here. And when we talk about a false step, this is what we're talking about. First of all, standing totally upright. He's not down. He's not loaded. He's not ready. But just watch at the snap of the ball what he does. And I run it back in slow-mo. So it'll run it back here in slow motion. Watch his feet at the snap of the ball. The right foot is forward. The right foot literally moves backwards. And the left foot, you see that foot switch right there?
That's so terrible. Upright. That's so upright. Like I said in my notes, I can't believe how upright he is. He is like, he's as vertical as he could possibly get. Like, talk about getting low so you could explode. I mean, go and watch the Olympic sprinters. You start low, you burst off. Like, it's not difficult to understand. He plays like he's standing centrally, just like standing up sometimes. You're never going to get any burst when you play like that.
Yeah, his first movement should be his outside foot, his left foot, exploding upfield. It should be ending past where his right foot was. His right foot should be dug into the ground. He's pushing off of it. Not only is his right foot not dug into the ground, it moves backwards. But his left foot doesn't even get past his right foot, despite the fact his right foot moved backwards at the snap. It's a massive false step. Like, so much wasted movement. And so that's just a really bad rep. And then here it is. This is the mom's iPhone 5 footage, by the way, right here. But this is a pass rush rep. And again, it's clearly not as sharp as a video. And it's not as magnified of a false step, but it's still here. Just watch his feet. Well, I'll run it through and you can see the slow-mo here. But see how that first move is for his left foot is forward here. And his first movement is for his forward foot to come off the ground. and he pushes off the back foot.
Shane,
That's just absolutely.
Look how upright he is when he
Yeah.
moves. It's
And that's all tied
amazing.
together. Like if you watch the really good pass rushers, they will be lower in their stance. They're loaded and ready to go. So there's not that wasted movement. He's not loading until the ball's already snapped. And so again, like whichever foot you want to have forward, fine. But your first move should be the back foot exploding past the front foot. And in both of these clips, you see him picking that front foot up first. And it just, for a guy that's going, if he's going to win, it's going to be off of those pass rush traits. It's going to be off that first step explosiveness. If your first step's backwards, you're wasting your biggest asset. And he does that a lot. And so he's really inconsistent with that false step.
And do you know what that also means, Shane? I don't know how much Hunt you managed to get the hands on film, but how many speed to power ball rushes did you see? I don't think I saw a good one. I don't think I saw one. I think anytime he won was bend the edge, dip. There's a great clip I've got, Shane, on my weaknesses where I talk about him being upright, where he runs into a guard and it's a proper like one-on-one, like heavy collision. The kind of one, if you're in the crowd, you can feel that, oof, like you can hear it. So he is blitzing and basically no one's there except the guard. And he hits the guard and you're thinking, right, now push him back. I mean, he looks like I'd look running into the guard. Like he looks like there's nothing there. There's no way. You know, he looks like Shane. He looks like a safety running into an offensive lineman. There is nothing there, and he's running a stunt here, so he should have a little bit of head of steam. Like there should be. There's nothing there. There is absolutely like if you just watch the guard once more, Shane. Don't even watch him. Just watch the guard. Look how easy this is.
Is that this guard? Is that a center?
I think it was the guard. If it's the center, it's even worse because then he's probably smaller. I don't know who it is.
It's the center.
Oh my goodness, it's the center. Yeah, it's the center. I mean, he actually ends up on one knee, Hunt. And I don't know who he's playing against. I don't know who the center is. You might know more than this, watching more college than I do. But I'm telling you now, there's not many centers in the NFL that should be able to just flat. I mean, he knocks him backwards. There is no speed to power there at all. And that's because of the way his footwork is. He doesn't really get, I genuinely don't think I saw a ball rush, basically. I don't think I saw him push back an offensive lineman into the quarterback. However, can I end with one thing, Shane, because we are going too long now? There is one clip I had from the Senior Bowl, which I think is really interesting, that I tweeted out at the very top of my article, I think the third or fourth one, where he didn't line up in this weird standing position. He didn't look like a safety. They lined him up at the Senior Bowl as in a four-man defensive end, hand in the dirt, and he's low and he flies out. Like he absolutely, look how quick he gets upfield here. He ends up getting there so quickly, he he stops the screen, the bubble screen, because he's that quick. Compare that to what we saw earlier. So I'm guessing the Eagles looked at that at the Senior Bowl and thought, oh, that's coaching. Because look at the difference in him in his stance there compared to the clips we've just seen. You'd think it's a different player. If you were to watch that play with his hand in the dirt, four-man front defensive end, and then you were to compare it to the clip that you showed a minute ago, the second one that you showed, where he's standing up, he literally looks like a different person. Like it's not the same one. So I would bet that some of the Eagles, we talk about banking on tools and traits, this is what we mean. Like, look how much better he is here coming out of this stance. And I think this is something that, I mean, look at his feet, Shane. Look at his feet in that clip compared to the feet that you showed earlier on. It's like the guy is not the same person. And you can bet the Eagles have watched this and gone, well, if we can combine that with what we saw earlier on with the dip, with the flexibility, with the arm length, don't get me wrong, you put it together, seriously talented player, but 23 years old, barely played edge. Putting it together is harder than it seems.
But even on this clip, like the load is better, and that's what he needs to do. He needs to get lower. But even still, like I watched this clip and watch how much faster the defensive tackles and the other edge rusher come off the ball than he does here. So, I mean, if I just scrub the video along here, the ball moves, and watch the helmets for the other pass rushers here come up. We're moving. Jalyx Hunt still hasn't moved. Now we're exploding. And so that, I mean,
in some ways that's more impressive because then that snap timing, when he actually gets going, he is late, but he goes.
Yeah.
Like he's off. He's off to the races. Look at the explosion of that right foot. Just bang in the ground, gone. But you're right. I think snap timing in general was an issue for him as well. He wasn't someone, as I said, the word I would say is inconsistent. And personally, for me, third round is too rich for a guy who's that inconsistent, banking on traits. But I get it. Like, if it all goes well, he'll be really good at how he's going to look great. And I think there's some things he does really well, but overall needs a lot of work.
Yeah, and that's where I come down on him. Like, there's some exciting traits. He's a year away from being a year away, I think. And when you're going to draft, like, to me, if you want to draft, let's say, I don't want to draft a player like this until there aren't players left that can help me now or that are just a year away. And I especially don't want to do it for a guy that's 23. If he was 21, I think maybe it's a different conversation. But I think there were guys that could have made a more immediate impact, a next year impact. I think Jalyx Hunt is a year away from being a year away, and then he's going to be 25 years old. So that doesn't mean that he won't turn into something. Now, most guys that you draft with this profile don't, but some of them do. And if they do, it's a great hit. But Austin's calling back to last week's podcast. It was a heat check, the Jalyx Hunt pick. And so we'll see if that shot falls for Howie Roseman. Yeah,
that is the one, isn't it? That is the one. Right. I think I'm all Jalyx Hunt. That was probably 50 times longer than we expected to go. We will clean it up, but I feel like we're in the flow there. We were getting into it, and I couldn't wait a week to talk about Hunt because I've spent so long watching his mum's iPhone film that I needed to get some takes out there on the podcast.
Yeah, it feels good to actually be back into all 22 film. It's been a while since we've gotten to do that.
Yeah, it makes you excited for the season. Long way away, but it gets the juices flowing, as they say.
Does it? Can you imagine, Johnny? Can you just imagine a world where we get all 22 footage every week with a crystal clear end zone view, and we can post it to Twitter without getting banned? I mean, it'll be nice. And I can't believe I just talked about how good NFL Game Pass is, because it's a complete garbage product, but it's so much better than trying to find Houston Christian footage on Twitter.
Yeah, if the Eagles could just never draft someone from Houston Christian again, purely for my own selfish reasons, that'd be great. Alabama, Georgia, just keep them coming. Loads of film out for those guys. Keep those guys coming. It makes my job so much easier.
All right. Well, I think that is going to about wrap it up. Johnny, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the people?
After an hour and 22 minutes, Shane? Not really. I would just say off-season is going to be quiet. It always is on here. If you want to support and chat to us, get on Patreon, join the Discord. It is good fun. We can talk a little bit about some stuff. We had a good chat last week with a listener from my neck of the woods over in Scotland, which is awesome. So it's always cool when you find different people from different areas that support you. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel like I've got no other football takes. My brain is, why am I thinking about football on the 21st of May? My brain is gone, so I'm all out. I'll leave it to you to finish.
All right. I want to hit just a couple of comments before we get out of here. Miss Chris says, y'all don't even know how smart you guys make me sound when I spit those facts in conversations, and I'm the only female. Austin says the world needs football-obsessed women fans. Certainly happy to help out there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Philly Eagle 56 on YouTube says, I just got here. Please keep going for a few more hours. Haha. The best part is as soon as we hit end stream here, you can skip back to the beginning and catch the parts you missed. So hopefully you'll do that. You guys do please subscribe on Apple Podcast, iTunes, wherever you guys get your podcasts. That helps us out. Eagles Pinpole Network, new network. We need ratings and reviews to help us get it out there. We've got 2 shows that have been airing for the last couple of weeks. John Stolnis is going to start airing some Eagles Memories episodes, and we're hoping to build it out to about 6 shows a week for you guys with different hosts by the time we get to the regular season. So ratings, reviews, sharing that certainly helps. Johnny mentioned the Patreon. Ad-free versions of this podcast are available through Patreon, along with access to a Discord where we can chat and some other cool perks like some creative control over the podcast and specific players for us to watch. So check that out. You can get a 1-week free trial through patreon.com/on the Shane page. We're also soliciting questions for a mailbag. We're going to do a monthly mailbag episode that doesn't have to be football related. They can be silly questions. They can be, drafting an NFL blitz team, what coach would be best in a 3-on-3 basketball game, whatever. Just those types of questions. We want to hang out with you guys to be able to do that. We're going to do our first episode of that next week. So send us questions. That one will be publicly available, and then those will be Patreon exclusive episodes moving forward. But we really appreciate you guys coming out again during the middle of a workday on a Tuesday in May to talk about Eagles film. We'll be back next week either to break down some more Eagles draft picks, or we're working on getting a guest on. So it's a little bit up in the air which one we're going to do next week. But either way, we'll have another show for you guys. So be sure you stay tuned to the Eagles Pinpole Network. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you.